The first time I realized an HOA could summon a sheriff's cruiser like an Uber. I was standing in my driveway in work boots holding a spool of fence wire and watching a deputy park right where the asphalt gives up and the gravel starts, no siren, no lights, just that quiet we're here posture that makes your stomach do the math before your brain does. And the stupid part is, I've driven that little stretch of road for years without thinking about it. 2 ruts wide gravel that pops under your tires, a slight dip where rainwater likes to sit after a storm. Oak branches leaning in just enough to make the morning light look softer than it has any right to. Then the pavement ends about 30 yards before my property line, and it turns into my problem. I never treated that spot like a boundary. It was just a change in texture, like you switched from carpet to tile. I bought this place 10 years ago because I wanted quiet. Not suburban quiet with leaf blowers and neighborhood Facebook drama. Real quiet. The kind where you can hear a hinge creak on your gate, and it actually means something. My parcel sits out on the edge past the tidy little quarter-acre lots, and the shared fences and the lawn rules backed up to a ridge where cell service gets sketchy and streetlights stop like they hit a wall. The HOA exists, sure. They send newsletters about mailbox paint and tree trimming, all that background noise. And the person running it, Karen, has been running it since before I moved in. Her name shows up on emails, shows up in the general store conversations, shows up everywhere the word compliance is said with a smile. But here's the thing. The last 200 feet of that road, the part that matters, the part that leads to my gate, was never on their maintenance chart. I know that because a spring flood washed out a culvert years ago, and I paid to regrade it myself. Nobody reimbursed me. Nobody even offered a thanks. Which honestly was fine. It told me what I needed to know. This stretch was mine. I didn't question it. Why would I? The title was clean recorded, deeded with its own private access. I put the closing folder in a drawer and didn't touch it for a decade because life was simple and boring in the best way. Then one afternoon I come home from town with fencing clips and a well filter part, and there's an envelope tucked behind a hardware catalog in my mailbox, standard paper, HOA logo, in the corner my name printed like it's just another routine thing. Inside, 1 page, no citation, no violation, no fine. Just a notice about community coordination regarding roadway upkeep and access consistency. The language was mild, polite, almost neighborly, but it leaned. And tucked into the second paragraph like a little seed was one word that didn't belong in neighborly mail enforcement. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time slower, like maybe the word would stop being there if I stared hard enough. Karen had signed it herself. Not the board, not a committee. Her name, her title, her signature, like she wanted it to feel official without having to actually be official. I didn't crumple it. I didn't call anyone. I just set it on the table and stared at the word enforcement for a long time, while the warm spring air pushed pine branches against my carport roof with that soft scraping sound that usually means peace. Except it didn't feel like peace anymore. I stepped outside with coffee and looked toward the road. Same trees, same bend, same gravel tapering into the woods. Nothing changed physically yet. The whole thing felt different, like somebody had quietly moved a piece on the board and was waiting to see if I noticed. That night, I opened the drawer I hadn't opened in 10 years and pulled out the property file. The folder was heavier than I remembered: survey title, report, parcel, record disclosures from the prior owner, the whole clean little paper trail of my life decision. Access listed as private. Maintained by owner. No shared easement language. No conditional clause tying the road to HOA oversight. The line on the survey stopped cleanly before my parcel began. On paper, the separation was beautiful, crisp, boring, and undeniable. But paper and tone are not the same thing. Her letter hadn't accused me of anything. It hadn't named a bylaw. It had simply introduced a vocabulary: coordination, oversight, enforcement, verification, words that suggest reach without proving it. And the thing about small communities is, posture travels faster than policy. A letter like that doesn't arrive with flashing lights. It arrives folded into your mail like it belongs there, like it's always belonged there, and if nobody challenges it, it settles. So I didn't respond. There was nothing concrete to argue. No fine to appeal, no citation to dispute, just implication. But I didn't ignore it either. I started doing something I've learned the hard way to do whenever someone starts speaking in confident sentences about your life. I started building record. Not emotion, not outrage. Record. A week later, another envelope. Same logo, smaller now, like it didn't want attention. It sat between a utility bill and a grocery flyer like it was routine. I made coffee first because I'm stubborn like that. Then I opened it and smoothed the crease flat on the counter. This one had a bolder header, and the tone had shifted from neighborly coordination to process. It said something like, due to a lack of observed compliance, the HOA would be initiating contact with external agencies to verify adherence to collective standards. External agencies. No agency named, no inspection date, no violation, just escalation. And that phrase, lack of observed compliance, made me laugh once out loud in my empty kitchen because it was so slick. Observed by who? Compliance with what? It was written like they were already watching me, already measuring me against rules that didn't apply. That's when I drove into town and went to the county clerk's office, because once someone uses the word enforcement in a letter to you, you stop relying on vibes and you start relying on boundaries. I asked where to find jurisdiction maps. The woman at the counter pointed me to a county GIS portal and handed me a printed URL. Most of it's online, she said, like she was telling me where to find the weather. On the way home, the sky went flat and gray over the ridge, and the word she'd casually used, annexation, started ringing in my head like a bell. That night, I sat at my desk, entered my parcel number, and watched the map load in layers, service boundaries, patrol zones, zoning overlays. And there it was, the HOA perimeter shaded in green, curving through the subdivision, and stopping short of the final bend. My parcel sat beyond it cleanly. I zoomed in until the lines looked thick enough to trip over. The boundary ended before my gate, not overlapping, not ambiguous, just ending. I screenshot it and stamped the date. Then I found the HOA's own boundary document buried on their website, low-resolution PDF, faded blueprint style, and even there the shaded area stopped before my property began. 2 maps, same answer. So why was Karen so confident? That question bothered me more than the letters. Because confident people aren't always right, but they're usually doing something on purpose. I started logging everything. Dates, subject lines, key phrases, the way the vocabulary changed over time. I printed every letter and slid it into clear sleeves in a binder because I didn't want memory rewriting details later. I wanted sequence, and sequence reveals intention. And sequence started revealing something ugly. She wasn't testing the road, she was testing response. Meanwhile, the neighborhood shifted around me like weather. Daniel used to stop his truck near the culvert and talk runoff and fuel prices. That week, he drove by with a nod through the windshield and no window down. Colleen, who usually waved from her porch, stepped inside when I passed, not abruptly, just carefully. Not hostility, distance. That's how this kind of pressure works. It doesn't need to accuse you. It just needs to make other people uncomfortable standing too close to you. Then on a Tuesday morning, I saw the cruiser, parked where the asphalt ends. Engine off, no lights, just presence. I was carrying that spool of fence wire when the driver's door opened and a deputy stepped out. Early 30s, clean uniform, hands visible like he'd been trained to look non-threatening while still being a uniform. "Morning, sir," he said. "Just doing a courtesy check." Of what I asked. He glanced toward the bend, then back at me. "We received a request from your homeowners association." That was the first time the quiet part got said out loud. "What kind of request?" He pulled out a notepad but didn't really look at it. "They asked us to verify there are no obstructions to shared access routes and that properties are in line with compliance expectations." Compliance with what I asked? He hesitated just long enough to be honest. "I'm not sure. There wasn't a specific violation attached. Just to take a look from public access." I took a few steps closer, staying on my side of the gravel, and asked him the simplest question in the world. "Do you know where the HOA boundary ends?" He shifted like a man realizing he'd been handed a weird job. "I assumed it covers the subdivision." "It doesn't extend here," I said, keeping my voice even. "This final stretch is private access maintained by me. It's recorded." He listened. No attitude, no threat, just a guy doing a thing someone asked him to do. "You're not conducting enforcement?" I asked. "No, sir. Just documenting that we responded." And there it was again, the real word behind everything, not enforcement. Response. A check mark, a record that the sheriff came out. He closed his notepad. "I'll log the contact as completed. No further action." Then he paused like he couldn't help himself. "You've been getting letters?" "Yes." He gave a tiny nod, almost sympathetic. "We don't escalate without a clear legal basis. Boundary questions are civil matters." I thanked him. He drove off. Dust settled. The road went back to being the road. But now it had been visited by authority that didn't belong there. And that's a special kind of violation because it changes how everyone feels, even if nothing happened legally. That afternoon, I added a new page to my log contact type law enforcement reason cited HOA request outcome. No citation, no enforcement. I printed the sheriff's coverage map and highlighted the part showing my parcel outside HOA boundaries. I took a photo of where the cruiser parked not because it was dramatic, because it was part of the sequence. And here's where the twist showed up, and I wish I could tell you it was some cinematic gotcha moment, but it was actually quieter than that. That evening, Bill, the guy at the hardware store who's lived here longer than most of us, handed me a box of screws and said, low voice, like he didn't want the walls to hear, "You know why she's doing this, right?" I shrugged. "Control," he snorted. "Not just control. There's a developer sniffing around. New phase backside of the ridge. She wants that road classified as a shared corridor so the association can claim it as infrastructure. Easier permits, easier access, higher property values. And she gets to look like the hero who expanded services." And suddenly the whole thing snapped into focus like a camera lens. It wasn't personal, it was strategic. If she could build the narrative that my private stretch was shared, then she could push the idea that I benefit from community infrastructure. And if I benefit, then surely I should comply. And if I comply, then I'm basically in. And if I'm basically in, then she can treat the boundary like it's flexible. Not with a court order, with repetition. And I realized something that hit me harder than the letters. A lot of power in this world doesn't come from law. It comes from people being too tired to argue with confidence. So I stopped waiting for her next move. I went back to the planning office and requested certified copies of the 2006 replat that listed my parcel under non-participating lots, meaning not excluded later but never included at all. I called the sheriff's administrative desk and asked for written guidance on HOA disputes. The sergeant I spoke to didn't hesitate. They don't enforce HOA standards beyond legally bound parcels, period. I printed everything. No commentary, just documents. Then I wrote one letter, calm, short, deadly, boring, the kind of letter that doesn't give someone room to spin you into aggressive neighbor. It said basically, my parcel is outside your jurisdiction as defined by recorded documents. Any communications implying enforcement authority conflict with those records attached are certified copies. Please cease misrepresentation. And here's the part Karen didn't expect. I didn't just send it to the board. I sent it to the sheriff's office too, with a cover note asking them to flag future presence requests related to my address as non-jurisdictional unless an actual safety or criminal complaint existed. Because if she was using their presence as a prop, I was going to remove the prop. A few days later, another HOA email hit my inbox with that careful tone clarifying access conditions for peripheral parcels, talking about how properties benefiting from community infrastructure should honor community standards. Benefit. Such a soft little word, such a sneaky hook. Then, because karma has a sense of timing, Daniel finally rolled his window down when he passed me by the culvert and said, "Hey, I got one of those letters too." I blinked. What? Not the exact same, but she's talking about outer parcels like it's a category. He looked irritated, embarrassed. "I'm inside the HOA, man. I pay dues. She's just reaching." And when people who are actually in the HOA start feeling the reach, the spell breaks fast. Neighbors started comparing notes. Quietly at first, then openly. The Community Awareness Committee email that had felt ominous suddenly looked ridiculous when 3 different people showed me the same template with their names swapped in. Then the sheriff's office did something so simple it was almost funny. They called Karen. I didn't hear that call, obviously, but I did get to witness the aftermath. The next board meeting, held in the little clubhouse where the coffee always tastes like burnt plastic, was packed. Not angry, shouting packed. More like "we finally noticed you" packed. Karen stood up front with her tidy stack of papers and her polished voice trying to frame everything as clarity and shared resources and neighborly standards. And then Sergeant Morgan, the older one from the second cruiser visit, walked in. Not in a dramatic raid way, just walked in uniform on calm expression and asked to speak for 60 seconds. He looked at the room and said basically, law enforcement does not enforce HOA standards. Presence checks are not validation of jurisdiction. And repeated requests about private parcels outside HOA boundaries will be screened and may be documented as misuse of resources. You could feel the air change. Karen's face did this tiny thing, like her jaw tightened a millimeter, and for the first time her confidence didn't look like authority. It looked like what it always was, posture. Then Bill, hardware store. Bill, bless him, stood up and asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "Are you working with that developer, yes or no?" Karen tried to laugh it off, tried to pivot, tried to talk about community growth. And that's when someone in the back, Colleen, the same woman who'd been stepping inside when I walked by, said, "My cousin works at the county. There's an application pending and your name is on the correspondence list. Silence. Real silence. That was the moment the room decided what this was not clarity. A land grab in polite font. After that, it didn't take fireworks, it took votes. The board held an emergency motion. Karen was removed as president. The outer parcels language disappeared from emails overnight like it had never existed. And a week later, a fresh newsletter went out. No buzzwords, no threats, no enforcement coordination, just basic community updates and an actual apology line that didn't mention me by name, but didn't need to. The best part, that gravel road I've driven for years without thinking about it, felt like mine again. Not because the gravel changed, because the story around it did. And the lesson, if there is one, hit me late and I didn't like it when it landed. A lot of people don't cross your boundaries with force. They cross them with paperwork tone and the assumption that you'll choose peace over precision. And sometimes being nice is just another way of handing someone your gate key. I didn't win by being louder than Karen. I won by being steadier than her narrative. I let the record do what a rumor can't. Still, I'll admit there was a moment of pure petty satisfaction. 2 weeks after that meeting, I was driving home and passed the clubhouse sign. Somebody had taped a new sheet of paper over the old standards notice. Big letters, plain printer ink, HOA authority ends at recorded boundary lines. Verify before you threaten. I laughed so hard I almost missed the turn. So here's the question that keeps nagging at me. And I'm genuinely curious where people land on it when someone tries to take your rights with soft threats and borrowed authority. How far is too far to push back? Is it justice when you dismantle their power? Or is it revenge when you make sure everyone watches? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me where you draw the line between standing your ground and escalating the war. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, or any kind of petty paper power, I want to hear your story too.